G'day guys, Adam Kogan from SSW TV. Today we have a special guest across the ditch in New Zealand. G'day Nick, how are you?
Good Adam, how you going?
Not too bad. Looking forward to hearing all about SharePoint 2013.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
We won't talk about the cricket because I don't want to depress you or anything like that. We'll keep on exciting topics like SharePoint 2013. Have you been using it for a while?
Yep. Been using it since pre sort of public betas, so some of the private betas. So yeah, definitely been having a good poke around for the last well over close to 12 months, I'd say.
Okay, and I think it's fair to say that developers have been told in 2013 that the whole world has gone HTML, and that's the way SharePoint's going, right?
Yep. They've certainly changed up the game as far as some of the techniques and skills you need. They've I suppose aligned it with the modern world of the web, so it's all HTML, JavaScript, and all this sort of client-side stuff that we're going to talk today. So
okay,
it has certainly changed.
And you're fully on board with the new app model. You like these SharePoint apps?
I like the possibilities. It obviously gives us a different way of working, but proof's in the pudding, and to see how many of those apps actually make it out there and how many people are adopting them. But hey, it's a good capability for developers and development houses to have.
Okay, so this client-side rendering, this I would say is not certainly a mainstream topic. It is something I hadn't actually even heard of. How did you come across it?
Almost by accident. So for a topic for the SharePoint conference in New Zealand, me and my partner in crime for the Christchurch user group were pretty keen to talk around the client-side stuff, so JavaScript and some of those areas that we knew SharePoint was coming pretty strong for 2013. And this client-side rendering is almost, like you said, it's a bit of a side topic. People don't quite know about it. So when we were digging into the whole client-side object model and some of those sort of JavaScript enhancements that have been made, this is one of those things that sort of fell out of the investigation. So I thought, wow, actually this is pretty powerful, and probably a lot of people don't even know it's there and what we can do with it. So it's something which we should be certainly talking about and just making sure people are aware there are different options now of how you can do things.
Okay, all right. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Nick Hadlee, as you've already said, and I'm based over here in New Zealand. I work for a company called Intergen. So we're a Microsoft specialist on all the Microsoft applications, and my role, I'm a practice lead for our Portals Content and Collaboration team. So we have a huge focus on SharePoint in that team, and so I'm based out of Christchurch in the South Island. So at the moment it's pretty chilly. We had some snow overnight. So yeah, I've been working with SharePoint since the 2007 version, just late 2007. Work with the user group here. I'm involved in the SharePoint conferences and generally just sort of getting involved.
Cool. And the ground's a bit more stable these days?
Yep, we've had pretty much stability now for a good sort of I'd say 9 to 12 months. Apparently we had some small 4 aftershocks a little while ago, but no one really felt them because we're all a bit desensitized now. So yeah, we're getting underway, but still a bit to do. So come on over to Christchurch if you're looking for somewhere to come and give some help to the economy.
All right, awesome. Okay, so let me set this up. I believe, and correct me where I'm wrong, you've got people using SharePoint, and they're always diving into different lists of one sort or another. If you're not happy with some of the UI in SharePoint, we can use your technique that you're going to show us to improve the UI by throwing a dash of JavaScript here or there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's basically the summary, because we already have a really good data model in all those SharePoint lists. We can define logic via views, and we can define structures via columns and fields and so on. But it's just that sort of UI enhancement where, well, there's always ways to do it, but then now there's a new way. So yeah, that's pretty much that setup that you talked about is exactly what we want to talk about.
Okay, cool. Let's jump into it.
Cool. So I suppose by way of introduction, as you've sort of set it up, this is sort of a typical case. We've got ourselves a SharePoint list of, in this case, some tasks. It's pretty SharePointy to capture some tasks and assign them to people and have a bit of a due date and a completion, but doesn't really jump out at me. I mean, Adam, maybe you could suggest how this might be improved.
Well, it's a couple of things. I would like underlines under the links. That's SharePoint, I guess. And the percentage complete thing. I'm always a fan of having data bars on those.
Right. So if we could kind of do something like that, that would give us some immediate visual feedback as to where something's at.
Oh, that would be perfect. And you're one step ahead of me. Great.
I'm not going to give you any links. Sorry, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to just start underlining everything. But yeah, I mean, that's something else we could do. But yeah, that's sort of one of the things, or one of those changes that you would normally expect from a UI perspective. If someone came to you and said, "Oh, I've got this list of tasks. I just want to be able to tweak the percentage complete," and say, "Yeah, sure, I can do that. I've got a way to do that pretty easily."
So are you going to show us how to add those blue bars onto the SharePoint UI?
Yep, that's going to be one of our examples, is actually how we can take a field like a percentage complete field and then actually change the way it's presented. So we'll show you how to do that. I must confess, my colouring is maybe not the best. I'm not maybe the best visual designer, but I think it gives us a pretty good impact what we've got there, so I'm going to show that.
Yeah, that looks good.
And so sort of second example is a little bit more drastic. So you got your typical announcements list or your news list where you're going to be lovingly capturing communications that you need to be sharing maybe with the team in the site or something like that. But it's sort of, I don't know, if you got $1 for every time you're asked to present this differently, you'd probably be a rich man. You'd have a few $100s in your pocket at least. So I mean, how I would normally want to present this, and you might agree, is maybe something a little bit more modern, like a carousel, a news carousel, something like that.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, especially if that's on your homepage of your intranet. That would.
Yeah, it's okay. We've got 3 items here, but what if we've got 20 or 30? Then all of a sudden we've got a huge waste of real estate.
Yes. Well, you can have a fast carousel in, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, exactly. So this is the sort of idea where we maybe put a nice carousel of those items and just plonk them on the homepage, and we've got a nicer presentation. So
Nick,
that's another sort of example.
I agree with you now that you're not a designer, but I get the concept.
I was using SharePoint Blue. I thought I was following all the rules. Okay, so anyway, that's sort of what we want to achieve, but how we're going to get there, I think we need to just talk about what are the techniques we're going to use and what does this entail. So client-side rendering is a superset of the way that 2013 is now allowing us to define the UI in SharePoint. So for lists and list views and those sort of things, we've got JSLink, and I'm going to delve a lot deeper into JSLink. Also sort of under the whole client-side rendering banner is the way that search results are also customized. I mean, I talked about those today, but that's also HTML and all client-side rendering. So client-side rendering is kind of a broad topic, but very specifically we're going to talk about this JSLink today.
Okay. And this so and can I just step back? And obviously this method is extremely different to what we did in SharePoint 2010. In SharePoint 2010, we couldn't do any of this. We'd have to use custom web parts and do XSL, right? Which I assume is the way you would do it, right?
Yep. And we'll talk a little bit about what we had to do and maybe some reasons why we don't want to do that anymore. Because this just wasn't an option until now. So it's brand new, and as we sort of talked about, it's probably a little bit unknown for some people. It doesn't get a lot of the highlights because there's so many other things in 2013 that are making it to the surface, like the app model. So there's a lot of stuff for people to cover. But yeah, JSLink, I suppose, the very niche topic we're talking about today, what actually is it? So it's JavaScript-based templates for defining UI, and so at any point when you have SharePoint lists and even list view web parts, you can decide to replace a part of that UI, and you've got quite a lot of freedom as far as being quite granular and saying, well, I just want to deal with just one field, or maybe you want to go a little bit further and really rip out the whole view and change the way that it's actually shown. So it's facilitated by a new set of properties that have been attached to all the SharePoint objects in 2013. So when you go in and have a look at the APIs, on MSDN, you'll notice that there's a JSLink property that's settable on fields, settable on views, and set it on the SharePoint forms and a whole lot of other objects. Now, we only really use it in a few of those cases, but this object is sort of spread throughout the object model now, so they've certainly put it there for us to use. And just to clarify, there's actually JSLink without a space, and that's the property that's in the object model, and we can change that and set that whenever we want. There's also a JSLink, which is actually a web part property on the XSLT web part, so you can just set that via the UI. So something you can do without maybe needing to delve right deep into the development valves as far as setting the object model. You can just do things via the UI with the browser as well.
So with that JS-based link, would that be essentially for power users that are given a bit of JavaScript and can plonk it in?
Yeah, could well be.
Okay.
I kind of find it funny that they've only made this available to the XSLT list view web part, so it's kind of replacing XSLT, but you have to go and use that web part to actually use it. So it's kind of a funny connection there.
And which method are you going to be using today?
So we're actually going to use both. So I'm going to demonstrate JSLink, the object model property, and then we're going to actually use a web part as well and change that out, because the technique of building up these templates and what we have to define, that doesn't change depending on how we use it. So we're going to use both methods.
Okay, got it.
So just as I talked about, if you go and hunt through the APIs, you'll find that there's these new properties as part of the object model. So it's all sort of there and supported, so you can interact with it via your standard object model sort of manipulation, so PowerShell or managed code or the JavaScript object model itself.
So just to confirm, Nick, that spfield.jslink you're showing us, if I've got SharePoint, I've already got that. I don't need to add that DLL. It's already there, right? So the guys can just go ahead and use it.
Yep, it's just like setting the title field of a list or updating the name of a view or something via the object model. It's just a property you can interact with. So
great. It's
there and waiting. So you kind of already alluded to it, Adam. How did we do this sort of stuff in 2010 or 2007? Because we certainly didn't have this option to us. So XSLT was one of the ways that we'd certainly customize list output. Biggest problem, I think, is that a lot of people don't like XSLT. That's kind of hard to understand. It's a little bit of an interesting language in that it's based on XML, but it requires templates and recursion and all sorts of other techniques which aren't often well understood, and it's fairly limited as far as some of the things you can do with it. And it's pretty hard to develop and debug for sort of most developers as well if it's not their normal choice of language.
The only guys that are good at XSLT are the same guys that are good at regexes, and they're very hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas you'd expect your web developers and your developers for SharePoint to be pretty across HTML and JavaScript and the sort of technologies that we're now being provided in 2013. The other thing so that was list output, but what about if you needed to customize just a field? And so really our only option was a custom field definition, and I don't know how many people have ever built them. I know they're pretty tough because you've got to use XML files to define parts of it. You've got to have a class that defines part of the custom field definition, and then you've got to deploy it, and it becomes an artifact that has to be in that environment, and then come upgrade time, you've got to worry about it. So custom field definition is kind of a pretty heavyweight customization option a lot of the time, and it might be valid if you've got a really complex scenario, but for most of the time you probably don't. You've got a pretty simple scenario and you use this sledgehammer to crack your nut. And so the other sort of things that you can do, just add JavaScript to a page and try and manipulate the page once it's output, but then you're really sort of hacking the page as opposed to working with SharePoint and with the framework. So it's an option, but it's sort of always a case of something could break or you've got to do quite a lot of work. And of course, you could always just create custom forms, using SharePoint Design or Visual Studio. So you've got all these other sort of options, but most of the time you probably don't need to do that, and what you're trying to change doesn't require that level of development.
Okay.
So why use it? I think hopefully we're starting to warm people up that this is an interesting technique, but what it really lets us do is either do a really targeted UI change to just a field within the context of a form, such as an edit form or a new form, or within a view.
Yep.
You can just change out an entire view if you need to, and because it's also part of the whole SSLT web part, which is the default web part that shows all list data whenever you add anything to a page, then you've kind of got quite a lot of hooks to be able to use it and quite a lot of reason to use it. Like you were saying, Adam, XSLT is normally the sort of technique or skill that someone has if they've also got some other fairly specialized skills like regex. So, JavaScript is modern. It's kind of the way of the current web world as far as you've got jQuery and all those other sort of libraries that are all JavaScript based. And
yeah, I think you've already got them all. As soon as you tell them they can use JavaScript or they can use XSLT, I think you've already got a good chunk of people already.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I don't think we need to sell it too much really, but just in case. And there's always the just because we can.
Yep.
And I say that facetiously, but really it is part of the framework. So they've given us a tool here to use, so we should sort of know about it and use it when it's appropriate.
Okay. Cool.
All right, so I think we've warmed them up. Hopefully we've got people kind of excited and maybe saying, yep, I want to use it, but how do I actually use it? So what's the sort of procedure that I need to go through? So JSLink is encapsulated in a JavaScript file. So you create a JavaScript file that has a JSLink template in it. And you'd probably be doing this in the Visual Studio project, so this is a standard SharePoint project. And
theoretically, we could do this in Notepad, right?
Yeah, if you're that gung ho, of course you can always craft this stuff up. So it's just JavaScript. So yeah, your favorite text editor and create one of these files, and then upload it to maybe a master page gallery, and that's about as far as you needed to go to actually create a JSLink.
So all we're going to be doing is creating a .js file. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, simple. Okay, then we're going to deploy the thing.
Yeah, well, you'll see that I've cheated a little bit, and I've kind of done like the whole, here's one I prepared earlier, and I've previously deployed these files, but that's the next step. You need to get them into a place where SharePoint can actually access them. So that's either deploying them to maybe the layouts directory if you want to globally make them available, and if you've got access to the actual box.
Is that the Hive method?
Yeah.
We're not going to advise anyone that's a method of deployment, are we?
I'm not saying drop it on there directly. I'm saying package up a WSP.
Right. Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
That can target the layouts folder as opposed to maybe a module that gets pushed up into a library somewhere. But either option actually works. I suppose the main point for people to know is that the JSLink just has to exist somewhere that can be referenced via a URL. So either of those is valid.
Okay.
Except of course if you're in say Office 365, well, you can't deploy the file system, so you're going to have to choose option B.
Right. Okay.
And so really the last part of that is then getting that JSLink property referenced. So you've created your JavaScript file, which has got all your custom template with the rendering logic. You've got it deployed somewhere, so now there's a URL to that file, but you now need to update whatever it is. So it might be the field, it might be the view, it might be whatever, the web part. You need to actually say, hey, I've got a file here, you've got a JSLink property, I want you to point to this file and use this. So you have to make an update to that .jslink property. You could either do that with PowerShell, you can do it with like a feature receiver, so managed code, C#. You can even just use JavaScript CSOM, so you know the JavaScript object model now has pretty much all the power that a lot of managed code does to actually set properties on SharePoint objects, so you can use JavaScript to set this. And of course, if you're building up, say, custom views in your Visual Studio project, then you have your feature XML where you can set this JSLink property as well. So you don't have to use code per se, you can have this sort of declarative option as well.
Right. But I think it's fair to say most SharePoint devs these days are pretty much using PowerShell a lot now. You know, more and more. It's a core part of you know, working with SharePoint and interacting. It's very similar to, you know, a SQL developer always uses .SQL files. Yeah. So I'm glad. So are you going to be walking us through these 3 or 4 steps here?
Yeah. So what we'll do, we've got a few demos to run through, and we're going to create the JSLink by just reviewing the JSLink I've done previously. I'm not that keen to go and create one just from scratch, but we'll just walk through it.
Okay.
I've already cunningly deployed it to the file system via a WSP, so it's already sitting there ready to go.
Okay.
And then we're going to start updating these JSLink properties via PowerShell, and also I'm going to show just the way that you can interact with the web part via the UI as well.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I suppose the main thing to do is start sort of talking about what can we change out and what do we need to know about these JSLink files. So in the next few slides, we'll sort of show the actual JavaScript file structure and what you need to put in there. But it's probably pretty important to talk about, well, how do I change things out and what can I change? So for an individual field, you've got 4 options. So you have the view, which is kind of the field being shown just in a standard list view.
That was the screenshot you showed us before, is that right?
Yep. And we also have our sort of our forms. So whenever we're creating a SharePoint list, we always get a few forms created for free. So we've got a display form when we're just looking at the item itself, or the edit form or the new form. So I'm just going to switch it. Yeah, I was just going to suggest I might switch out and do that. So this is just a pretty basic SharePoint list that we're looking at here. It's got 2 fields, a title field and a field I've called custom field, but that's all it is a text field I've created, so nothing really custom. So this is the view. You know, so this is standard sort of view of this field is right here. Then whenever I open up my options, I've got my view item. So this is my display field. And if I close that out, if I go edit item, I've obviously got my edit form.
Yep.
And then last of all, if I wanted to create a new item, then that's my new form.
Right.
So that are the sort of those 4 contexts that we've got as far as an individual field.
Got it.
So let's just go back. As far as views, so we've already kind of talked about views in the context of a field, but when we're looking at a view, we can also decide to kind of take over the entire rendering process and decide how the whole view is actually shown, and so that's how we'll be doing things for that carousel. So instead of saying for an individual field I'm going to do something, now we're going to say for the whole view I'm just going to take over and I'll be responsible for deciding where the data is shown and what wrapping HTML I use and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And then last off, those sort of techniques can be applied to views or fields, or also just by sort of hooking it up to an XSLT list view web part, which is a real mouthful. I wish they had a shorter name for that thing. All right, so let's sort of start talking about, I suppose, the code or the actual pattern. Yep. So this is the boilerplate as far as if you're going to create a JSLink template, you've always got to follow this pattern. So what you have is a fairly sort of odd-looking chat. It's an anonymous function, and it's sort of wrapped inside a call to itself. So it's what's called a self-executing anonymous function. And you always create one of these in your JS file and that's kind of the wrapping function that's going to then start calling the template that you're building up. This is also sort of always in every single JSLink, and so you create this override context object. So this is just what's expected from the JSLinks template. You then define a templates property, and then you can start to add all the different overrides that you want to add from this point on. So at the moment we've just got a comment here saying this is where we put all of our actual overriding logic, and so this is where we're going to start deciding, well, what fields do I want to override? Do I want to override the field just in a specific form, like a new form, or do I want to override it in a view, or do I want to just take over the entire view, so I want to override the whole body? So this is when you start plugging in those different options here.
Right. So Nick, on that bit there,
yep.
Since we're talking about, your first example was that percentage complete, is it in that bit there that you have to decide which view, and I'm going to go with the base display view, and then is that the bit where you say, look, I want to modify, I want to inject some JavaScript in the percentage complete field?
Yep, that's exactly the bit where you then say, righto, what field am I going to actually override, and then
right. Okay.
When do I want to override it? Is it in all four of those sort of options, view, display, edit, new, or is it just a couple of them? And that's when you start sort of plugging in your JavaScript logic.
Got it.
And so this is a really trivial boilerplate so far. There's going to have to be a lot more code in here to actually do anything useful. So once we've actually defined that, the last thing that's going to happen in this template is we're just going to register it with the template manager. So this is all sort of part of the object model that's provided by SharePoint. So you register your new template with SharePoint, and it'll take over the rest and inject it on the page and do all those sort of things it needs to.
Great.
So now we had that kind of comment, put all your stuff here. So this is a really basic example of overriding a single field, and the field's called link title. So if anyone's ever familiar with looking at the names of fields, especially the internal name of a field, often what you see on the screen or see whenever you're in the UI is not what the actual field's called. So the bog standard title field, it's actually called link title when you've got the little drop-down menu off it. So in this example here, we're saying my template is going to override a specific set of fields. So that's why I've got that dot fields, and then the set of fields I'm going to override is just the title field. And for the title field, I'm only going to override the view, nothing else. And I'm actually going to override it with static text. So it's a pretty useless example as far as I wouldn't go and put this out in production, but you can kind of see what you're doing.
Is a list, and that title field will just say some text here 100 times.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And
don't put this one
do you
in
know
production.
why they called it link title instead of title?
Yeah, I think it's because whenever you've got a list view, you can actually use the title. There's like 3 different options. One is just the title, one's the title with a little drop-down menu, one's the title with I don't know, another option. And so you've got all those different sort of title versions that you can use effectively. And so this one here is the title it's got the drop-down menu off it. So I think the title is the only field that kind of has these multiple variants of itself. So it's probably a not a good one for people to be tackling too much. But normally this would be the name of the field that you've created, and you probably would have a name that you actually know. So yeah, it won't be too obscure. So the thing I suppose is that's pretty trivial example, and it's just static text. But what you're really going to be doing, and this probably shows us better, is you're going to be calling a function, and this is the name of a function. So you're going to have to create this function in your JavaScript file, and if by providing that name of the function, that function will get called, and then that's when you can start to put some more complex rendering logic. So you might actually start to implement a few business rules, check the value and decide if the value equals something. You're going to have certain behavior, and you can start to craft the HTML that's actually going to get injected on the page. So that guide normally would look sort of something like this. So this is an example of that function. Now by providing that function name, you will automatically be provided an object, which is a context object, and that actually has all the information about, I suppose, the list data and the list schema and the current item value, and so you're going to have a lot of context as far as information that you can deal with and decide what am I actually going to output. And so in my example here, I'm just starting to slowly handcraft some HTML, and so I'm starting with an empty variable, and then I'm slowly building up this string by putting in some bold tags, which are really bad, by the way. You should never use those. And then I'm also adding in the actual value of the title field. So the good thing about this this JSLink is that it has access to all these properties. You can just use sort of dot notation. So as long as the field exists, so if there's a dot percentage field, you can go and access it like an object. So it's pretty easy to sort of navigate up and down and use all the properties that are available to this JSLink technique.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So really we're gonna jump in and do a real live demo now, because that's the best way to see it. So this one here, we're going to create that data bar, and so we need to create the JSLink, which we've sort of done previously. We're going to have a look at it and actually walk through it and talk about what it's doing. It'll need to be deployed to the file system. So I've created my cake earlier, and it's been in the oven for a little while. So I've got that guy sitting there waiting to go. And then we're going to update the property of this the field, so the percentage complete field, and I'm going to do that with some PowerShell.
Right.
And then we're going to hit the page and see that it's actually doing what it should.
Okay, good. And just to remind the viewers, out of the box, this is not what a SharePoint looks like. He's going to add that last column there to make it look like that.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
Rightio, let's have a look. So let's go to our task list. So this is our standard 2013 task list, and it looks pretty fancy to start with. It's got this sort of timeline along the top now, and it really does some nice colorization based on the due dates, and it does little strikeouts if you've got 100% complete. So it's already a lot richer than it used to be.
That's right.
But we've got some percentages here, which people think of percentages in that sort of visual way, I reckon. So.
And I noticed that the data is already out of date. The SSW webinar is about 50% done, isn't it?
That's true. We could change this. Then we can edit it and actually watch the data bar change just to get rid of the smoke and mirrors. Okay, so we got some items here anyway. So let's have a look. This is our first sort of JSLink file. So we've got this anonymous function that we were talking about before right here. So that self-executing anonymous function, and we've already created our context object. So this stuff, this first two lines, that's going to be in every file you ever create. And then our register at the bottom, that's going to be in every file as well. It's really this bit here where we're actually starting to do something. So we when we define our templates object, then we go in and say, well, we're going to actually just override a field in this context here. So we go dot fields, then we define a sort of a literal object inside, which is going to have more instructions on what it is we want to actually replace. So percent complete is the name of that percent complete field in the task list.
And is there any way we can make that strongly typed? Is there any way that we can use something like link to SharePoint or something so that can be strongly typed?
No, it's all sort of JavaScript, so we don't really have a lot of typing unless we want to start using I don't know, namespaces to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a flavor of that. But no, we don't really have all of that typing capabilities that we do with managed code. So
maybe we need to add a bit of TypeScript into this.
Well, we could use TypeScript. It would certainly help us build it up. I mean, I haven't seen if the two are compatible. I'm sure they are, because
they would be.
Just outputting JavaScript, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're doing most of our projects these days on TypeScript, and we've had a very pleasant experience. So it's maybe next demo.
Yeah, we should let's see how these two work together. Maybe that'll be the next one. Okay, so for this example here, we're only going to replace the percentage complete fields rendering in the context of a view. So if I had a look at this in the display form for an individual item or the edit form and so on, it won't change. So it's a very narrowly focused change. But this is my function that I'm going to call. So whenever this field gets hit, it goes into this field function, and so this gets called every time there's something on the page to render. So there could be a performance hit here, and I know that that's probably a question you're going to ask me, Adam.
Yeah, obviously if there's a few hundred records and you've made a big fat chunk of JavaScript in this view field function, it's going to be slow.
Yeah, so sort of usual caveats would need to apply that we're going to have to really test this out and sort of see what performance hit we put onto our sites. So in our function, which is probably where all the stuff's actually happening, we can check if our context is null just to make sure that we're not, I don't know, trying to start throwing errors into the page. So this is just being a good citizen. Check if it's null. If it isn't, return some empty HTML. Notice here I've actually commented out the debugger statement. So one of the really cool things with any of the client-side stuff we're doing now in 2013, so whether it be search templates or this JSLink templates, is just by adding this debugger statement and turning on debugging on your Internet Explorer, you can actually debug the JSLink file and step through and actually inspect the objects and see what's happening. So I reckon it's going to give a few people who are maybe a bit fearful of, wow, well, JavaScript, it's also uncontrolled and I don't have any of the tools available to main sort of development languages. Well, we do kind of have this at our disposal.
Right, okay. I have a small question on this. When you replace the original JavaScript, is there a flicker that appears?
I haven't noticed one, but then again, I think if you put it under load or you ask it to do something quite hefty, then maybe you'd notice it. But this is being executed so quickly, I've never noticed that flicker.
Okay.
But it is done on the client, and it is done by injecting this JavaScript file on the page. So that might be something you see happen in some scenarios, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, cool.
So I suppose the rest of this is just building up that HTML. So we need a variable to put our HTML in. So we just start off with a nice empty variable. Now this context object, as I was talking about earlier, we're going to get the current item, so it knows it's working on a single item in a view, and then we're going to get that percent complete field. So this is all just dot notation. So we're working with true objects here in that JavaScript sense, and there are other things we could be looking at. And we're also going to make sure that the field has some sort of values in it. So we're just doing a sort of an if then else sort of thing here. And then if it's actually got any value, then we're going to start building up our HTML. Now, in this case here, I've just created a div inside a div, and I've got a width of the div represented by the percentage complete of the task. So there might be better ways to do your HTML crafting, but it's good enough for this. And because the percentage complete is directly proportional to kind of what I want to present on the screen, then I'm just going to use that width percent of the task itself and output that HTML. So a few people might be cringing now, thinking, oh, I'm going to have to handcraft HTML. There's no way around that. That's how JSLink works. So let's go back to our page. We'll just do a refresh. That's all sitting there. It's all good to go. Now, as far as how we're going to wire that file up, if we have a look at the top here, you can see where I've deployed it to. So it's currently sitting in the layouts folder under a couple of subfolders. So this has already been deployed. So if I go over to some PowerShell, I can see that it's pretty simple PowerShell here. I'm going to grab the web that's got my demo in it. I've got my list, and it's called tasks with custom field, so really well named. And so then I'm going to go and grab the percentage complete field from that task list, and then I'm going to set the property, the JSLink property, to this file which we were just looking at before, and then update the field. And once I've done that, SharePoint takes over the rest and injects the JavaScript on the page, and the rendering will happen as long as we've created a template that actually makes sense and hasn't got any errors in it or anything like that. So I could just run this as is, but I just want to sort of show people how this works. So I'm going to run the first 3 lines, paste them in here. I've got my field. If we have a wee look at this percentage field, we can see there's a JSLink property. At the moment, that's set to, I suppose, the default. So we know that it's just doing whatever the out-of-the-box rendering is. If I go and grab my update, paste that in there, and then lastly, I'm not going to copy this. I'll just type this one in. Update the field. So now I've updated that property. I can go into this field, hit F5, and my data bars are showing. And like we said, let's go and edit this, Adam, and I'll come up with good examples. I came up with another one today, so I'm gonna make that 50%. See now 50%'s moved along, so it is all live. We're definitely, I don't know, how far through are we now? Must be at least, I think, 40% through.
Okay. Oh, there's so many little things on the SharePoint UI I can't wait to fix. And one of them is that form you were just in. I can't stand that the cancel button is a button as big as the OK button. The cancel button to me should always be a link, so it's obvious. You know, that's the exception. The main little button you want to hit is the OK button.
You're going to go and fix up all the UI paradigm stuff.
That's right.
But, you know, at least we can fix the way that some of the data is displayed at the moment. That's easy enough to do.
Yeah. So just to confirm, you wrote your JavaScript, but before you could test it or see how it worked, you had to run the PowerShell once. Is that right?
Yep.
Just once. Yep. You don't have
Just
to
once.
do that every time. Do you have to do that every time you change to JavaScript? Right. Okay.
That's now defined. Now the only thing that I will point out is if you let's not tell people to do this, but if you are editing that file on the fly and you're expecting things to update, your browser is probably going to be caching that file. So you know, if you're editing, say, your JSLink and it's sitting in a library, or it's maybe sitting on the file system and you wouldn't be editing that directly, then make sure you're actually closing out the temporary files and the cookies just in your browser, because you know, it will cache it and you'll sit in F5 and go, why is it not changing?
Right.
Yeah, so a little trick for people, but I'm sure they'd run into that one pretty quickly. So that's our field example. Now, what about kind of doing something a little bit more ambitious? And you know, it's all very well to change fields, but what if we kind of want to do custom type web part views? But you know, we want to do some real nice UI type stuff, not just change the way fields look. So this would be that kind of example of turning an announcements list into a carousel, and I'm sure people can come up with all sorts of different ways they want to present information in a kind of a web part format. So same kind of scenario like we had before. We have to create a JSLink file. So we're going to define a template. We're going to need to deploy that to the file system. So steps 1 and 2 I've kind of done already, but we're going to still review them. Now, different step on this one is that we're going to update the JSLink property of the web part. So I've got a web part sitting on a page, as opposed to having to run any PowerShell or code anywhere. You know, we can just do this via the UI. You could do this with managed code as well. You know, you could go and update this property of the web part on the page. It's just there's a lot more heavy lifting, and for this simple test, we don't need to do that.
Yep.
And then we'll go to the page and hit F5.
So the major difference will be just the HTML or the JavaScript, won't it? Yeah.
I will call out as well that in this example, because I'm using jQuery and carousels, I'm going to do a kind of another step and actually just throw some stuff on the page to help this work. But you could put this all within the JSLink file yourself, but I don't actually want to do that, so I want people to see the HTML change and then the application of another JavaScript library to actually make things sort of go that next step. So let's just jump across again. So this is a SharePoint homepage, and it's got just a list on the page. And so this is, if I edit the page, this is your stock standard list view that you get whenever you create a list. You can then get a free list view you can put on any page you want. So we're not talking sort of some obscure web part, we're talking pretty much the most used web part you'll find, I would have thought. Right. So we'll just leave that page in edit mode, and we're just going to have a wee look-see at the carousel JSLink. And you'll see I've commented out a whole lot of stuff just so we can talk about some of these things as well. So in this example here, same boilerplate thing again, we've got that self-executing function. So nothing's changed. We've defined our context and our override that's got this sort of .template property. But unlike before, where we were then going in and saying, well, for a specific set of fields, we want to then change out you know, the rendering of a view or a form or so on. We're actually just going to say, well, for the header, I don't want the header to have anything, because these templates and the way that these web parts work is there's a header, there's a body, there's the fields, there's item, and you can see them down here, there's a footer. There's all these different sort of parts to the web part rendering that you can then take hold of and change out. Now, one thing I've found with these sort of list view web parts is the header is the area where that little menu is saying, oh, add a new item here, or you know, drag files here, and often you don't want that. So we're just going to get rid of that with an empty string. If you try sorry, when I say an empty string, I'm lying. It's actually a string with a space. An empty string, it'll ignore it. So I don't know, it's almost like the templating engine's kind of clever enough to say, oh, you probably gave me nothing. That doesn't make any sense. So only way to zero it out is with a spaced string. Now body, we're going to take over basically the rendering of the whole thing. So unlike before where it was going to get called the function for every item, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually be responsible for taking all of the items and deciding what we're going to do with them. So we're just going to get one function that's called once and then do all of our rendering in that one function, whereas before our function could have been called as many times as there were items on the field. So this may be where performance stuff can actually be considered. And just something else to point out, so we've got all these different sort of things in our template that we can override. We've also got a couple of functions that we can call. So whenever we're creating one of these templates, we can, prior to our template being sort of applied, we've got a pre-render function that can get called, and we also have a post-render. So you know, if you're wanting to maybe inject some other scripts on the page or do some final tidy up once you've kind of got all your rendering, that's where maybe those functions will be used.
I can think of Google Analytics might be a good thing to plonk in there.
If it made sense, yeah.
Yeah, for public CMSs, for sure.
And so, you know, for my carousel example, I'd probably be pre-rendering that, or I'd be calling maybe the Ajax framework to inject some JavaScript on the page, and then at the post-render I might be calling my carousel function to do its carousel magic on all of the items I've just outputted, but I haven't done it that way this time around. Just wanted to let people know about it.
Okay.
So this function, just like before, it's got a context, so I can go and then find out a whole lot about the data that I've got in this sort of web part. And so I start building up my HTML again. And so this HTML is just been crafted to work with a jQuery carousel function and framework. Big difference is that I have to actually go through all of the items in my list. So whereas previously I can kind of just say, what's the current item, I want to do something with it. Now I've kind of got to iterate through all my items myself. So this is where I'm actually talking to this sort of list data. And it's got this weird property called the list data JSON items key. So it's kind of how you unpack the data. and it's all part of the same context object, so it's not sort of stuff you need to hardwire anywhere. And then I'm just going to loop through those items and just create a bit of HTML for each of them, and then close off my HTML and then return the whole thing. So fairly sort of stock standard. Any questions on that one, Adam?
No, not yet.
No. So I'm going to do some manual editing. So what I'm going to do is actually just grab this URL because that'll be useful. So let's go back to our page here. And so if we throw this guy into edit mode, and we can see down in our options here, we've got XSL links. So we've still got our old XSL options.
Yep.
We've also got JSLink just down the bottom. So this sort of directly maps to the .jslink property that might be sitting in behind their web part, but they've exposed it, so we can just change it from right here. So I plug that chap in, and so this is the file that I've pre-deployed. So that could be just pointing to maybe a library, like a master page gallery with a file there.
Yep.
If I click OK, so we can now see that the rendering of this web part's just changed based on what I had in my template. So at the moment it doesn't look very carousel-like, but the carousel logic is actually is in another JavaScript library. What we've done is kind of set up the HTML to do whatever it needs to do. Now, the next step, I'm going to add this sort of carousel JavaScript to the page just to kind of get the whole thing working nicely. But you could put that in your JSLink if you wanted. I just want to separate the two out.
Got it.
So let's just go back to Visual Studio, and it's not too much to add. So I've got a reference to jQuery. So just a script link. So this is probably going to be already on your page if you're using it heavily. So it might be in your master page. So this could be redundant. Then I'm referencing this tiny carousel, which is a jQuery plugin.
Yep.
And then I'm just calling some jQuery to say, right, when you're ready to go, just pop a little bit of styling onto the page for me. I could plug that in another way if I wanted, but I want it all nicely contained. And then call the tiny carousel function, which is actually going to then set up all of that carousel logic. So I just copy and paste this guy. And here's another new thing that I'm sure people have come across, which is the Embed Code. So this is kind of like a new web part for chucking code on the page. So this is sort of showing us that they're really pushing us towards JavaScript and sort of on the page code. So anything I paste in here, hopefully SharePoint's not going to go and try and munge it and fix it up for us and change some spelling mistakes or anything like that. It'll just take it verbatim. Yep. I insert that on the page, and now the styling and the JavaScript is taken over. I can save the page, and now my carousel sits here with my nice little buttons, and I can just sort of breeze through the news and go, wow, this is amazing. So that's a nice sort of tidy example of how we can do some fairly hardcore UI enhancements and build almost custom web parts by just using the out-of-the-box stuff and then just taking over the rendering.
That looks good, Nick. Are you on Google at the moment? Can you just Google something for me?
On Google.
Twitter, Bootstrap Carousel.
You want me to Google that right now?
Google Bootstrap Carousel. Obviously that looked alright, but I just want to show you maybe for the audience that you can see a pretty sexy carousel. Bootstrap the carousel. Maybe instead
carousel.
Try that.
You want me to click this one here?
Yep, and have a look at that. Next time you might want to use that. It's scroll down. It's pretty sexy.
You want me to click one of these?
Oh no, just there's a nice there's some nice,
an example down the bottom?
Yeah.
Wow, this is a long page. Hold on there. That's
maybe what I want to do. Carousel there. There should be. Yep, look at
Oh
that.
yeah, that's nice.
You could use that next time. And,
Right.
yeah, you'll seem even cooler.
It will be cooler. I've made some nice images as well, but it looked much funkier.
Yes, Bootstrap is awesome.
Right, that'll be V next.
Cool.
All right. Carousels, everyone loves them anyway, so yeah, we need to improve that carousel. So the last one I just want to show is probably the most realistic example as far as why we would be adopting this over and above maybe an older technique. So whereas those other sort of options, especially the first one, you know, that's good for sort of point changes, and we probably just wouldn't have done that previously, or we would have done something a little hackish. Whereas this sort of third demo, I want to sort of show the alternative to a custom field definition. So we want to add a whole lot of behavior to a field, but not because of the way we want to store the data, just because of the way we want to interact with it from a UI perspective. So I'm going to quickly look at the JSLink file, which we've got a template, and in this case we've got a view, an edit, a new, and a display form defined, so we can sort of see how we can do all four. It's already on the file system, so we've pre-baked this one again. And then we're just going to update the JSLink using some Powershell again this time, and actually see what it does.
So what is different here?
Oh, well, I'll show you. So this is the end result.
Okay.
But let's so this is just the list at the moment, and let's just go and have a look. We just go list settings. So I've just created myself a custom field, and it's just a single line of text. So that's all I've done.
Okay.
And so it's kind of just a basic data store. And I've got a couple of URLs to some images on the SharePoint asset library at the moment, and I think I've borrowed one from the out-of-the-box kind of media player as well. So there's a couple of items here, nothing too special. If I go and look at the item itself, well, you know, it's text. That's what text looks like. If I edit it, again, it's just text. And if I'm sure I don't need to go to the fourth, but I will now, because I'm committed. If I create a new one, you know, this is just text field. So pretty sort of standard example of a custom list to capture some information to represent whatever it is in my sort of business problem. Now, in this guy, same sort of style we've seen previously. We've got a self-executing function, anonymous. We've got our context object and our template being defined. But you can see here that the difference, whereas previously we just had kind of the dot fields and then we're saying what field is it and it's for the view. Well, I'm defining all four sort of possible changes I can make to the field. I want to change, you know, those sort of four components: the view, the display, the edit, and the new form. And because these are just sort of standard object notation, you know, just a comma between them, and then it'll call these functions. So these functions, they are a bit more complex, so I'm not going to go into them too much, but you can see that it can start to get a little bit more difficult to work with when you actually have to start working with, say, edit forms. You then start needing to deal with input validation and callbacks. You know, you want the actual data to be written back, and so there is some good sort of boilerplate code for this. And so, you know, you can get pretty extreme if you want to. The asset picker, that's an out-of-the-box thing that we can just call. So there's a whole lot that you can put in these JSLink files. They're not just sort of nice trivial demo examples. So I've got that JSLink sitting there. Again, I've got myself a nice bit of PowerShell. So I'm going to go and grab my custom field demo list, the one we were looking at just before, and I've got my custom field, which is just a text field, and I've got my my asset picker JSLink, and it does a few other nice things. I'm going to update it. So if I just go and copy those guys, run them in here. Now we can go back to this here. So this is my view. So the views are sort of the simple one. I'm just transforming that that URL into an image. So taking a little bit of liberty. I'm also doing that in my view form now. So before it was text, now it's an image. So you can see what's happening there. And then let's just go and edit it. And so this is where kind of it gets a bit more powerful, I suppose. So that little browse button, so I was talking about the asset picker, which is part of SharePoint that you can call and put on a page. So I've got a little browse button. If I click that, it'll launch my asset picker. So I can go and grab something from my site assets. Let's grab the info path image, click insert. Now it's popped it in this field. I've also got a little preview sitting underneath it, so I can sort of see real life what's happening. So I've kind of turned a text field into a rich asset field. And yeah, sure, I've already got a rich asset field I could be using, but if I want to be putting previews in and maybe controlling the way the URL is stored and those sort of things, maybe that's the sort of scenario where I'm going to say, actually, I want a custom kind of rendering of a field, but I just want to store it in some sort of standard sort of field like a text field, because then I can deal with it myself. I don't like how SharePoint is nice and handy and goes and changes URLs on me and strips out the absolute URL and does all those sort of things. So you can have a lot more control. So that's kind of the final example that maybe show the variability of what we can really do with JSLink. We can go from that kind of basic example of just an individual field and do a little bit of change up. We could build kind of a web part view, or we can then really change the way that fields are rendered in all these different forms so that our whole editing experience is actually pretty rich.
Well, that was really impressive. It really shows that the SharePoint team have put a decent investment into SharePoint to be able to do so much customizing by just chunks of JavaScript around the place.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the real kind of use cases where we need to really change the way we're interacting with the user interface and make it maybe rich for our users, but we're not having to do all sorts of heavyweight lifting as far as custom fields and lots of managed code. And we can do a lot of sort of more lightweight development and still package it and deploy it in a nice way that's all sort of supported.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's not a big, complicated framework that you would need to know like you did in the 2010 days. I think any JavaScript developer showing that once is going to be able to do that. Obviously, you could take advantage of other frameworks to make these even prettier, like I said, Bootstrap or Kendo UI. And I think, I think it's very important.
Well, anything you want.
Yeah, very important that we probably tell people to use jQuery 1.x, because many people using SharePoint are going to be in organizations that need to support, IE 6, 7, 8, and the new jQuery 2.0 and onwards does not support those older versions of IE.
Probably I suppose the other thing to think about there is that some of your older versions of IE and SharePoint 2013 aren't going to work together very well. Like even IE 7 doesn't work from an editing perspective. A lot of the editing menus, they won't work. So if you're moving to 2013 and you're in that legacy IE kind of world, you're probably going to have to really think about that as well.
All right. Okay. Actually, when they say that SharePoint fully supports, multiple browsers like Chrome, it does work, but there's certain things that only work in IE still. Have you noticed that?
Having some technical difficulty. There we go.
So what's happened?
Yes. Well, sorry.
They say they support all browsers, but they do. But there's certain bits and pieces that only show up, especially with document management in IE. Which I don't think they make.
Yeah, I mean they support all browsers, but there's always a caveat. If you look in the supported browsers matrix, you'll always see those little X's where it's not supported, and it'll be some of those things where maybe ActiveX is still used, or I don't know. You've got a pretty good experience in most of those modern browsers, but it isn't parity. You still need IE for the best experience.
Yeah, that's the bit that annoys me. They don't explain it's not 100% parity, which I thought, I can use Chrome, and get complete parity. And every now and then I can't come across things that I'm sure I've seen before, but they're just because I'm in Chrome.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, yeah, I suppose we should wrap up, should we, Adam?
Sure,
Even though
yeah.
it's been fun, and I'm sure people have now sort of looked at JSLink and what we can do with client-side rendering and thought, well, actually, you know what? If I don't know JavaScript, I better go out and figure it out because there's a whole lot that I can do, and not just this. I mean, the whole JavaScript object model and app model, it all relies on those skills. So, I don't think we need to convince people to learn JavaScript, but maybe also to consider some of these new techniques in 2013. So JSLink, that'll let you change the UI, and it's all baked into the object model, so it's fully supported, and you've got quite a lot of power, I suppose, to do things both at a sort of a low-level object like a field, or even working with web parts and kind of just switching them out.
And where do we go if we want more info?
So there's some good resources out there. So even if you just did a search for client-side rendering, the first couple of hits you'll get from MSDN give you some examples of how to use some JSLink for fields and list views. There's some guys out there that are certainly, they've been writing about this as well. So Chris O'Brien and Tobias Immigrant, and there's another in there, idubs.com. He did I think a session at one of the conferences on it. So there's definitely some good stuff out there if you want to go and look for it. But these are probably all of the resources you'll find. There's not a lot more apart from what I've got on the screen. So a few people have talked about it, but there's not a whole lot out there. So I think you really just have to get in there and start looking at it.
Okay, cool. Are we done?
We are done.
Awesome.
Yep, if you need to get hold of me, then please feel free to send me any emails you need to, or you could hit me up on Twitter. I'm sort of lurking out there, but I'm not really. You can send me a message. I'll certainly respond. And I've got a blog with some older stuff on there. Haven't put anything new, but I have to put some stuff about this, and especially about our session.
Awesome.
And Adam knows how to get hold of me.
So thank you very much, Nick. That was really good. Now we have a great overview of client-side rendering in SharePoint 2013. It might have been a bit obscure before this session, but now you know how powerful it is. And with that, this is Adam Kogan signing off from SSW TV.